Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was really jamming out to that music. My name is Talitha McCloskey, and I, along with Skylar Gerard and our moms, Gwen Keith and Marlene Smedu, are the co-founders of RaiseHER Community. I am super delighted to have you all here today. We are launching our season 1 of our Lead with RaiseHER Community event, or season rather. And so this is the first of 3 for September, October, November that will be focusing on linking your community. And so today we'll be chatting with 3 Saskatchewan-based leaders who are doing, in our opinion, a very great job of bringing together their community, either in their workplaces or the community at large, and we'll formally introduce them very shortly. One of the key leadership behaviors and skills that we recognize as being central to the success of linking one's community is that the ability of to connect with others compassionately and empathetically. Today, we are more connected via social media and phones and just working digitally and being virtual from home. We're a lot more accessible to each other, but it seems that we've lost that compassion that comes with the discourse, and especially when chatting with those who have differing opinions. And I'm sure that we're going to hear a little bit about that today. So overall, just get ready for a very inspiring conversation with some practical advice provided by our speakers and how we can all connect with others in a little bit more of a compassionate and empathetic way. So as I've already put in the chat, but I'll say it again, we welcome any questions and comments you have throughout the presentation. Just put them in the chat, and our moderator, Melissa, will address them as she sees fit, as it flows with the conversation. So if anything pops up, just feel free to put it in there. So before we fully dive into our event, we always start everything with a land acknowledgement. So we are going to be, or honoring rather, Treaty 4 territory from which we are currently broadcasting. I know that Amanda is tuning in from Treaty 6 territory up in Saskatoon. So with this acknowledgement, we will also be honoring that treaty land as well. It's as you can see, I'm wearing my orange shirt today, and tomorrow marks Orange Shirt Day, and also our first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And it's especially important that we honor the lost children and survivors of residential schools, their families, and then just their communities at large that have been impacted. It's critical that we acknowledge the tragic and painful history and ongoing impacts of residential schools, and understand that that whole process is a vital component in the reconciliation process. So I welcome you to stop eating for a minute, put down your phone, and just take in this land acknowledgement with an open heart. RaiseHER Community acknowledges and honors the Indigenous lands on which we live and work, the traditional land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay respect to the Indigenous peoples who have lived, and continue to live on this territory, and whose culture, practices, and spirituality are tied to this land. We acknowledge our own settler ancestry and the colonization that has created oppression, suffering, and hardship for Indigenous peoples for many generations. Through acknowledgement of the history, land, and treaty, and our people of Treaty 4 territory, we demonstrate our own respects to the First Nations and Métis communities and people, and commit to act on truth and reconciliation through listening, seeking to understand, and growing strong together. My last piece before I pass it off to Skylar is that I just want to note again that when we come together in these spaces, especially in a virtual space, we are grounded in the ideals of love, compassion, and mutual respect. Anything beyond that, any comments that are either come off as an attack or an instigating or antagonizing to any of our speakers or our participants, we will be getting involved with that and removing you, just because we need to make sure that our speakers and ourselves and our attendees all feel safe in that process. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Skylar, who is going to introduce our nonprofit for the season, and then get into our speakers as well. So Skylar.
Hello, everybody. Like Talitha said, my name is Skylar Gerard. I'm the other co-founder of RaiseHER Community. And today I want to chat with you just quickly a little bit about our values at RaiseHER Community and how that aligns with this season's events. So community and support are 2 of our core values. And because of that, each season or each quarter of our events, we donate a portion of our proceeds to a local community group usually that targets and serves the needs of women in our community, to help them out as well. So this season, we've selected the Regina Open Door Society to receive this donation. And they, as you may or may not know, they're an amazing community group. They work directly towards compassionately helping the newcomers and equipping them with successful tools to integrate into our community. So just a little bit more about RODS. It's a nonprofit organization. They provide settlement and integration services to refugees and immigrants in Regina. They're committed to meeting the needs of newcomers by offering programs and services that enable them to achieve their goals and participate fully in the larger community. Their vision is to bring a welcoming community, to build a welcoming community enriched by the diversity and strength of newcomers to Canada. So we actually have Victoria Flores, a representative from the Regina Open Door Society, here today to do a quick little intro, a little bit more about them, so you know kind of where your money is going today. So I'll pass it off to Victoria if she wants to come onto the screen here to give a quick little intro.
Hello, hi, thank you for that, Skylar. Thank you for that introduction, and happy to be here, really happy to be not necessarily part, but to witness what you guys are doing and the conversations that you're starting. And with the Regina Open Door Society, what we do is work to build community, a welcoming community for newcomers to Canada. That includes people that come here as government-assisted refugees, privately sponsored refugees, or just newcomers to Canada who have moved here through other immigration processes. And our goal is to find and have the resources and tools that they need to settle in a way that this feels like community. So that includes settlement services, orientation services, different kinds of counseling services, employment services, language services. We also have a childcare center and many other resources to help people feel welcome and feel like they can call Regina their home. So if anybody has any questions or is curious about the Regina Open Door, you can always visit us on our website or through our social media channels where we share what's going on at all times. And if you'd like to volunteer with the Regina Open Door, you can also do that through our website. We have lots of different ways that community can get involved with us.
All right, thank you so much, Victoria. And honestly, on behalf of everybody here and definitely RaiseHER community, thank you for all that you do. So really appreciate you being here today. Okay, so we're gonna get right into introducing the panelists. We have 3 amazing panelists today and 1 panelist slash facilitator. So I'll start with her, Melissa Coomber-Bendtsen. So Melissa Coomber-Bendtsen, I'm sure many of you have heard of her. She's an amazing lady based right here in Regina. She's been leading the YWCA as CEO since 2015. And throughout her career, she has demonstrated the capacity to exercise strategic leadership in response to supporting community needs, which is why we're here today. In her professional and personal roles, she is a passionate advocate for social justice. She's a graduate of the U of R with a Bachelor of Education, and her background includes restorative justice work with young people, as well as community programs and involvements in the areas of employment, education, childcare, housing, outreach, and leadership. As a leader of the largest and longest serving women's organization in Regina, Melissa is dedicated to supporting the community and creating the space for change. So welcome, Melissa. Next, I'm going to invite Dr. Alex Wong to the screen. Dr. Alex Wong is an infectious disease physician and clinician researcher with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. He's also an associate professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan. Along with colleagues from the public health in Regina, Dr. Wong helps to lead the research and evaluation unit in the ID clinic, which consists of research nurses and coordinators. The unit carries out research studies and clinical trials in the areas of viral hepatitis, HIV, and COVID-19 in collaboration with national and international partners, and is recognized for its work with marginalized populations. Dr. Wong teaches and mentors learners at all levels, from medical students to infectious disease fellows, and he really enjoys communicating about science and frequently serves as a medical correspondent for various media outlets. So thank you so much, Dr. Alex Wong. And finally, I'd love to introduce Amanda Guthrie. Amanda is a queer and disabled white settler from Treaty 6 territory who's born and raised in North Battleford. and now lives in Saskatoon, has been there for the past 13 years. She's currently the interim executive director at OUTSaskatoon, and serves on the 2S LGBTQ community center there, where she has worked for 7 years. The majority of her work with OUTSaskatoon has been in providing educational training and creating resources on how to create and foster affirming environments and practices for two-spirit, trans, and queer people. Outside of her work, she's volunteered on numerous political campaigns and loves being involved in community work. In 2016, she was named CBC Future 40 Under 40 recipient. And in 2019, she was nominated for Women of Distinction Awards. So welcome and congratulations, Amanda. And so everybody, this is our amazing panel that you'll be hearing from for the next 40, 50 minutes. So I'm going to pass it right off to Melissa to dive into the discussion.
Thank you very much, Skylar, and thank you to both you and Talitha for having me here. Amanda and Alex, I'm so excited about sharing this space with you and this panel. Alex, I've been following you very closely throughout the pandemic, and it's a little bit of me is fanning a little bit over the fact that you're Reddit famous now, as my husband told me the other day. So that's very exciting. And Amanda, it's always an honor to see you again. I've been a huge fan of yours and the work of OUTSaskatoon for many years. So I'm very excited to share this space with you guys today. When I look at the piece that Skylar and Talitha put forward to us about compassion and really having a conversation about how we compassionately meet with and have conversations with folks, particularly during this time, and particularly as people are more and more isolated, and also more and more, I think, focused on themselves in lots of ways and having to protect themselves or understand what their choices are going to be, et cetera, et cetera. The idea of what community means, for me, has been a fascinating topic as we go through this, not just in terms of how we serve a vulnerable population and create community at a time when everybody is sort of isolated, but also how we bring that back and how we rediscover it or how we reinvent it. And so this idea of compassionately connecting with others is an interesting question about what that looks like and what that feels like. So before I kind of share my opinions or take on it, I'd like to shoot it off to either one of you to jump in and talk a little bit about what a compassionate connection looks like or feels like to you in the work that you do or in your personal life as we've been navigating these pieces.
I also, similar to you, Melissa, was really excited to spend some time on screen with Dr. Wong last night as I was kind of getting in the mindset for this. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been following him on Twitter for so long. I'm such a fan. I wish I didn't need to be a fan, of course, right? Like I wish I didn't know anything about you. That would be, ideal if, the current context was different, but
I actually think I'm starting to blush. Because it's all women here, and I'm like the only guy, and it's like, oh my god, I got asked to do this thing, and it's just, oh my god, I'm actually starting to blush now.
No, it's so good. It's so good. Anyways, you're great, and I'm just really excited to be here with both of you. And then Melissa, yeah, I just the other day was raving about YWCA in Regina and the fantastic work that you do, especially around, really being bold leaders in making space, meaningful, authentic space for trans, two-spirit, and queer people, which historically has been really difficult within women's spaces. So yeah, I'm just so excited to be here with the both of you today. And I guess to speak to what you were just saying, Melissa, is that, I too, through the COVID pandemic especially, like there have been peaks and valleys, I would say, that I've experienced with community. And, outside of that, within my work at OUTSaskatoon, the work of, trying to connect people and educate people who are not familiar with the queer community and trying to connect them to, understand the humanity and the existence and to hopefully one day affirm queer identities is really rooted in compassion. How can you teach people to be compassionate to those that they see as foreign? And so I think this topic is so necessary in so many areas of work, especially within the work that the three of us do, but especially right now, given the current state of the world. And then here in Saskatchewan, I think how can we connect people and come back to a place of community care? Because right now it feels like people are really rooted in this scarcity mindset, and we're just seeing, you know, awful things happen to so many people and to systems that we rely on. And so I think, you know, talking about compassion is something that, yeah, I'm really excited to do today with the both of you.
Thanks to not only RaiseHER community for reaching out and inviting me to this, but also to my fellow panelists, Melissa and Amanda. I mean, there's a lot of overlap in the work that I do and the work that both of you do at OUTSaskatoon and at the YWCA, as you know, infectious disease. You know, I mean, the pandemic obviously has illustrated this in a way like no other, but again, infectious disease affects disproportionately our marginalized and vulnerable populations. And, you know, a fundamental piece of being an infectious disease physician and is trying to help advocate for those that live and exist on the margins of society, and to try to help, you know, put all of these individuals to a better place. And honestly, it's always been a bit of an uphill battle, I think, across the world. And you know, the pandemic has just highlighted that more than anything else. I can't say that I ever had any master plan like regarding any of how all of this has kind of gone. I actually don't. I literally just kind of do things moment by moment, sort of day by day. But I try to kind of remember some key things, which is that you know, we're all human, and there's moments where we're going to be angry or frustrated or upset, you know, but I try to focus on some core values around having integrity, you know, being a caring individual, and trying to let that show, and trying to stay above all of, I don't know, the morass, because I've never really did social media up until just about 6-7 months ago. It's almost overwhelming in a lot of ways. And the media stuff in general. And so I just try to be authentic and honest and let those values show. But you know, the pandemic, again, like all other things that we do day to day, has just highlighted just some tragic inequities. And when you see me talking about some of those things, it's just me speaking to what I believe my core values are, and at the same time trying as hard as possible, you know, to try and project a message of hope and optimism, and trying to be a productive and have it be a productive conversation, talking about things that we can do to move forward, talking about things that everybody can do to move forward, rather than it just being, you know, just complaining or being angry, which isn't necessarily always, it's never really a productive thing. So I'm happy to kind of engage in some of that discussion more with all of you. And again, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm honored being amongst all these women. Marlene, I see you're on the screen as well, so I miss seeing you, you know, here in the hospital and here within your official capacity too.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. One of the things that you both spoke to that cued something for me was this idea of a core value, or like a base belief that one can start any conversation, or can continue maybe sometimes to lead with compassion, because I think sometimes that's hard. Like sometimes I just want to be a dick. You know, I just want to do that. And because it becomes exhausting sometimes and overwhelming, like you said, Alex. And I think one of the core values that puts me in a place of always recognizing that I can be and understand where somebody is at is that idea that fundamentally, I think I believe that fundamentally people are good and maybe don't have the knowledge, understanding, experience, opportunity to learn or be different. And certainly anytime that I've been in a situation where I'm with somebody or having a conversation with somebody whose viewpoints or beliefs I don't necessarily align with mine, or who have done something that maybe is not in alignment with my values or the values of the YW, I think there's always that piece that I'm reminded of, that ultimately people are good. And I think I intrinsically believe that. And so looking for and seeking for why they may be feeling that way allows me to be more compassionate in my response to them. So rather than choosing to be a dick in those situations, I can say, okay, there's an opportunity here. And there's an opportunity to have, if I show some vulnerability in this conversation, there's an opening for somebody else to show some vulnerability. And I think once we do that, for me, then the conversation becomes one about seeking that kind of honest, authentic self, rather than potentially what we say or what people are saying reflecting our fears or our ignorance or all those other things I think that get wrapped into how we display what we're thinking or what we're believing or what our opinions are. And I have to remind myself of that. I have to remind myself to go back to that place all of the time. And so I think one of the things I'd say about a compassionate connection is it is exactly what you said. It's authentic. It's going back to that idea of how we're creating community and that community care that you talked about, Amanda. But it's also, I never say this word right, so I shouldn't have chosen it in my brain, but you have to be, you have to do it with intent. I'm going to say it that way because I can't remember how to use it the other way. It's done with intent every time. And I think it may not look like that, but certainly I feel that it has to be. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how you continue to show that kind of compassion and that honesty and authenticity and that commitment to calling people in, really, and changing viewpoints or beliefs when people differ from you, when they seemingly are arguing against you or whatever the case is. How do you continue to show that compassion? Anyone can jump in.
Do you want to go first, Amanda, or do you want me to start?
You go for it.
Okay. I think I'm just going to take a moment to think. I guess I'll start by just saying that, when I see a patient, whatever situation or circumstance that individual may find themselves in or be in at that particular moment, my responsibility as a doctor and as a caregiver is to look after them and to have compassion and to build a therapeutic relationship, which is built predominantly on trust. And that individual has to trust me to, make good decisions and to actually care for them. And, I have to earn that trust. That trust is not just given, right? That's not like, I think, again, modern medicine, you can say whatever you want to say about it. Again, there's obviously power differentials that exist and so forth, but so many of the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis and that we're responsible for looking after day to day have such vulnerability, such trauma, such history of just pain and suffering that we try to approach every single person in a way that is gentle and kind, no matter what the circumstances may or may not be, even in the most horrific of circumstances, I think. And I won't even talk about examples of that. So I kind of start with that basis. And again, I think Talitha has sort of talked again about the importance of truth and reconciliation. I'm not wearing orange because I don't have an orange t-shirt. I know it's horrible. Try to find something, but we just finished like a prayer from one of our patients, just with regards to all of the history around residential schools. And I only bring this up just to say that I remind myself that, again, I as an individual do not know the circumstances and the history and whatever may or may not have led a person to the point where they are at this given moment, when they're in front of me or when we're going back and forth in some sort of virtual setting or whatever the case may be. And I just start with that. And that has really helped me to suppress some of the base emotions that you may get, when, for example, somebody, is openly sort of angry or accusatory says something bad or whatever the case may be, I just kind of start with that. And I just try to start. It sounds ridiculous. I don't really know how else to say it, but I just try to start with some kindness. And that applies in all forums, like whether it's me talking to an individual face to face here in the office, whether that's me seeing someone in a hospital setting or in a ER ICU setting. It applies to the work that I do day to day with my colleagues, like in the healthcare setting, and then honestly, even on social. I'll be honest, like I'm at a point now where obviously I don't have the ability to look or see or really pay attention to every single thing that comes through. And I get a lot of email and stuff, and some people are happy and other people aren't happy with me, and that's just the way it is, and I have to be kind of like okay with that. But just starting from that place of kindness and trying to be kind and giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. These are some basic things that I think apply well, not only in the professional sphere, but also in the personal sphere as well. And that's something that hasn't just come naturally. That's something that has taken a lot of time and energy and practice to help get to this point. So that's helped me, I think, a little bit as I've kind of embarked on this crazy media stuff, so that I don't basically say something that I then will regret and have people come and say that they're going to fire me.
Please keep your job. We need you to keep your job. Yeah, there's so many things that you just said that I've got all of these different thoughts going off in my mind. But a place that I often come from in my work is working a lot with fear. I find that if I am educating a group of people who are unfamiliar with the queer and trans community, and there is potential hostility or aggression or disgust or ignorance, and then I often wonder what that person is feeling, because disgust and ignorance are not baseline feelings that human beings hold. We feel something that leads us then to disgust or anger or other emotions, and so often it's fear that a person isn't going to get a job, or a fear that they're going to have to work alongside somebody that they don't understand, or that their child will come out and that they won't be the child that they thought that they had. And so really sitting in that space with people, and I think kind of similar to what you've said, Alex, that when you're trying to navigate power differentials and you're sitting in a space with a patient who has gone through significant trauma, whatever it might be, that when you're sitting in a space with a person and you allow for vulnerability and you allow for just whatever questions a person might have, I think approaching that is approaching people through that method is compassionate, and often leads to success, or that's what I've seen. And Melissa, you had also spoken about, calling people in, and that's something that we do a lot of coaching on at OUTSaskatoon, is how do you call people in rather than calling people out? A simple example is pronouns, right? A doctor messes up on a patient's pronouns and misgenders someone. How can you call that person in rather than calling them out and causing a scene? Sometimes I think it's completely fine to call people out and cause a scene. It is okay to be a dick sometimes. I do think that that's okay. Like you were saying, Melissa, I think that there comes a time when it is okay to just, be a dick to people because they haven't treated you with compassion over and over and over again. However, if you can meet people with compassion when they have made a mistake, or if they've made a decision or a choice that you don't agree with, and you can meet them with compassion, I think that you can teach people and educate people in pretty profound ways. And that's what we see at our work at OUTSaskatoon. That's how we see incremental social change, is through approaching people with compassion.
And then one other small thing, thank you, Amanda, that I would just add, I guess, is that for me personally, this has not been like, this has been a very, very long iterative journey to get to this point. And I have screwed up so much over the last decade plus of my career with regards to a lot of things. But I've been fortunate enough, I think, to have had, good, kind mentors and people who are willing to basically just call out my shit and say, look, like you just shit the bed there. Like you use, and I've done everything, like from literally calling a guy a girl and a girl a guy, to just totally like, again, I said some stuff in 2015, like about Africa and the prairies or stuff using these terms and stuff. And I pissed everybody off, like from the folks from Africa who were like, that's such an insult, to every single like indigenous leader who was like, how dare you compare us to Africa, for example, right? Like I just totally, and I had no concept of any of this at all, and how my words could be perceived, how people could perceive me. I was clueless. And so it was a very, very, and I paid the price. Like there were professional ramifications for that, personal ramifications for that, work ramifications for all of that. So it took years and years to get to a point where it almost sort of comes naturally now to me when I think about things before they come out of my mouth, and when I think about how I want to deliberately put messages forward that are going to only be perceived in a certain way and only sort of be pushing a certain type of message. That's not something that comes naturally to, frankly, any of us. And I've had to put my foot in my mouth so many times and pay some professional and personal price to get to this point where I can think something and I just know inherently, or that, you know what, maybe I need to just put that off and not say that or do that because it doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right about it. But at the same time, when it comes out, it just, I know it's right, and I don't know how else to explain it other than that, but to say that it requires work. It's like anything else in life. If you want to get good at something, it just takes time and energy. And it also takes people that are willing to sit and coach you and teach you and help push you through times where you basically just totally fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think that it's so helpful, especially when people see folks in leadership positions and just assume that, oh, this person, always says great things. They always have their shit together, for people to say, no, actually, like, here's my laundry list of all the times that I fucked up. Here are all the times where I've done the wrong thing, right? I think that can be such a helpful teaching tool. And then it also allows people to be more vulnerable, right? Because if they know that you've said terrible things, then they can say, oh my God, me too, right? Or, oh, okay, you question that thing. So am I, help me work through that. How did you get to where you're at? I think that, sorry, my cat is demanded to be present. I knew this was going to happen. It's obsessed with Zoom. Why are pets obsessed with Zoom? But yeah, I think it's super, super helpful to be open and honest about the times where we have failed, because it's not possible to teach people to be perfect and exude perfection ourselves when that isn't real. So yeah, I think that's a really good lesson to take away.
And just the vulnerability is not something that comes naturally ever. Like it doesn't. Like I nearly cried a couple days ago. I was doing the interview with Bonnie Allen, like 48 hours ago, and I just about lost it. I was like quivering, and I was like, shit, I'm gonna just lose it here. I gotta stop. But you know what? Bonnie and I have known each other for years, and I mean, I trust that woman to take what it is that I say and take the message that I'm trying to push and put it in a way that is not basically going to get me blown up, to be completely frank and honest with all of you. So that's why it happened, right? Whereas if I'm talking to somebody that I don't know or don't trust or, have no real relationship with, then it's going to be a very different type of dynamic. It's just going to be standard stoic Alex, and such. So, but I've learned, again, like with all other things, that when you let that vulnerability show, that's what draws people in.
Yeah.
And it takes a certain, I don't know, I'm looking for the word here, but it takes a certain strength of ego. I don't know. You have to have a secure ego, basically.
Yeah.
To actually show that kind of emotion and that sort of thing. And people that are able to do that, like some people that we've seen on the news lately talking about how devastating are, you know, people that are crying on camera or just about to do it. Those are the kinds of people that have gotten to that point where it's like, yeah, this is real, right? And but they can do it because their ego is secure enough to allow for that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there's no doubt I echo both of you in terms of the amount of times that I've really screwed things up and the lessons I've learned. I think in doing that, I've also learned to have compassion for myself in that, which allows me to continue to be compassionate for others that I see are making mistakes, or that I you know, who don't have beliefs or views that are inclusive or that are respectful. You know, there's that piece when you learn how to have compassion for yourself as a leader, maybe that gives you that confidence that you're talking about, Alex, that that ego, you know, and that is well-earned confidence, might I add, because it's very different than what I often talk about, the unearned confidence, because I think unearned confidence doesn't necessarily come with a compassion for yourself and a vulnerability that you've put forward. And so when you've earned that confidence because of the vulnerability you've shown and the compassion you've shown, I think it does become more natural to be able to show compassion to others and to really get the nuances of that calling in that you were talking about, Amanda, and those pieces. So on that note, beyond just, you know, allowing yourself to learn from your vulnerabilities and your mistakes and all of that, these are incredibly challenging times to build community, to have a sense of community, and to be able to connect people together. And again, a fascinating thing that I've been thinking lots about during the pandemic is you know, how do we build that when we take away this idea of being together, which is sort of a natural, doesn't always happen, but it's a more natural, easy way to connect with people and to be able to create a sense of community. You know, how do we stay connected as we're more and more isolated? And certainly in my world at the YW, our services and programs continue to happen, but many of us and many folks that we serve, you know, were very isolated for a long time, and recognizing what happens when we brought people back together in a safe way and doing everything we possibly could to make sure we could do that as quickly as possible and recognize how important that was. I think it was, you know, we felt it at a certain point. We felt like that connection was gone. And that's been challenging to keep that connected virtually on these pieces, you know? And I think we've probably all witnessed that when we have these small in-person opportunities and you're just like, oh, that filled, I mean, for me, who's an extrovert, you know, that filled some joy that I was definitely missing and didn't even realize, you know? So I'm wondering if there's other ways that you've seen community connect or how you've done that during this time.
I guess I'll start just quickly by saying that honestly, my day-to-day life, like pre-pandemic and ongoing pandemic, hasn't actually really changed all that much, to be completely honest with you. I've come to work every single day, not taking a day off. My kids have been fortunate enough to continue in daycare. We've only had like one interruption, like due to COVID as a result of the entire pandemic thus far, which is shocking. And I live a life of privilege. And so I'm fortunate enough to, at least at a personal level, have had relatively limited impact in terms of my family and my day-to-day routines and so forth. And because I'm at work where honestly, a lot of my social needs are fulfilled, you know, I haven't felt, I think, the same kind of emptiness. And I'm an introvert by nature, even though you might think that's not the case, like based on my media stuff and so forth. So I haven't really, you know, had that same sort of impact, I think, as many others have in the community. At the same time, I guess the only thing that I would say, nothing immediately comes of tremendous insight other than to say that I do believe that there is a bit of an art to being able to communicate effectively and to express, you know, emotion and everything like through a virtual space. And that's a skill. It's not a natural thing, again, I think, for a lot of people. I was just finishing up my call, and I had one of the unit clerks who I've known for years, like on one of the wards at Pasqua, just randomly come to me, and he just asked me this question of like, Alex, like, so when you're talking to the camera, like I'm doing right now, like, how does that work? Like, how do you do it, right? And it's a completely, I think, unnatural thing to be here in an empty room talking to a webcam and trying to trick your brain into thinking that you literally have an entire audience of people in front of you. But I guess because I've done this stuff so much now, it has become almost second nature. Again, my brain is able to I'm able to trick my brain into thinking like that I'm standing in front of an audience of like 1,000 people or 10,000 people or something, and that's just the way I act. But it's such a completely weird, unnatural thing otherwise. I think that it's hard, I think, for people to kind of be authentic the way they would otherwise be, especially if you're an introvert, but really for everybody, like if you just were in a group of people, either small or large. So I don't know whether that helps or anything, but I'm able to talk like this, and the way that I'm talking right now is not actually any meaningfully different than if we were in a room together, you know, or a small lecture hall or whatever, and there were 15, 20 people in the room and we were all just sitting and having a conversation. It's the same way that I would talk and interact with all of you, except that I'd be looking at all of you and, you know, and so forth. So I don't know, that's one small thing that has happened for me.
Yeah, you're right. Curating online space is a weird art. Like, it's weird that we now are like, oh yes, this is how to make an online space feel authentic. When like, what? You know, I'm in my house alone right now. And as an educator, when we had to, just gonna put you down, when we had to switch online, it was so hard. I'm used to being in a room. I like to move around. I like to move my arms. And I'm also a raging extrovert. So being alone, you know, in a room with a bunch of black screens and pretending like I'm trying to engage with people was quite a mind trick for sure. You know, through our service provision at OUTSaskatoon, through the pandemic, it's been so interesting to see what, you know, going online, the sort of connections and accessibility that's created. For many of our social and support groups, we've seen numbers increase, and we've also seen borders become obsolete. We have people from across Canada and into the United States that have attended some of our social and support groups, whereas before that never would have happened. But at the same time, we've seen far less people from here in Saskatoon access our groups. And so who and how and what are our services, who are we actually trying to reach, has become a really interesting conversation internally. And similarly, with education, we've been providing education now nationally and internationally throughout the pandemic. That never happened before. And so we're connecting far more with different people, but who are we not connecting with? And also, what is the experience for educators? It's a lot more isolating and difficult. And I think the quality is a bit lower doing online training versus being in a room in a lecture hall with people and interacting and seeing people's heads nod. So connection, it is this weird art right now, but I definitely think that, you know, as we opened back up and now we are putting more restrictions back in, trying to figure out how to keep people connected is really one of the ways that I think we'll get through this pandemic. At OUTSaskatoon, our drop-in is now open, and we've had so many good conversations with people accessing services around, you know, talking about the vaccine, working through fears, and they only got to do that because they were able to be in person, right? And so how do we combat this isolation that is only exacerbating the pandemic? When, you know, connection, obviously vaccines, right? Masks are all great, but connection is really vital for so many people who are still isolated, which is it's a big concern and hard to combat. Yeah.
And one very small thing is, I guess I get a lot of practice with all of this as well because of all of the virtual care that we're now forced to do, which honestly, I think is actually a good thing in the end for many situations, you know, in terms of convenience and making, you know, care more easy and accessible for those that have the means to do it, obviously. But there is also an art to talking to someone over the phone as a care provider and trying again to establish a relationship. Now, again, there's certain circumstances where this is just not good, or like if you're talking about someone that, if you're giving someone bad news or something like this, then that's not the appropriate forum. But for something that's kind of like routine, there still is a bit of an art to talking on the phone or talking on the webcam in a way that makes someone feel comfortable and, you know, heard and listened to and so forth. And so maybe that has also helped to refine some of my technique, you know, which allows me now to, you know, be a little bit more comfortable in the camera and so forth.
Yeah, that's great. Marlene has a question for us that I think works very well with what we're talking about right now. And that certainly is, as we're talking about how we're connecting or creating online spaces, all of us coming certainly from a place of privilege. And her question is, you know, for those that don't have access to that kind of technology or those spaces, some of the folks we may serve, what have we noticed about isolation for some of those vulnerable populations that we serve? And I'll maybe start because I read it probably before you both were able to read it and see it. I think, you know, one of the things that we're certainly seeing at the YW is a significant crisis of fentanyl and drug poisoning. And, you know, we have had more deaths in the last few months in our organization than we have, you know, in the last 6 years that I've been in this role. And certainly, I think that is definitely a product of the fact that, well, we're all from our privileged places feeling the effects of the pandemic, and those are traumatic pieces for us. Those that have been navigating traumas and continue to navigate traumas, and I would argue have self-medicated through drug use, those traumas are just that much more exacerbated. And certainly we have seen, with a lack of community, a lack of connections, a lack of even gathering, a lack of, for a while, you know, support services and drop-in centers and some of those things that may have offered some form of stability not being available to folks. There is that for us is sort of this, you know, hidden pandemic. It's a pandemic that we're not really talking about. And so I would say that kind of isolation and recognition, how we're experiencing it for those that are already working through lots of traumas, I think has led to some of that and what we're seeing. And just the amount of people not being able to access those services necessarily. Is there anything, Alex or Amanda, you would add?
Yeah, I would say like the crisis within a crisis is definitely real. You know, across the board, queer, trans, and two-spirit people face, you know, higher percentages of experiencing mental health crisis, just, you know, in a good year. And so we've seen the amount of counseling services that we provide has jumped by 243%, which great, we got funding for more counseling, but what is happening out there that, you know, well, we know what is happening out there, but it's these layers of trauma, just like you're saying, Melissa, you know, whether it's people, you know, who are needing to stay in unsafe housing environments, whether, you know, we've seen an increase in homelessness here in Saskatoon, I think across Canada, that's pretty consistent. And then, yeah, the crisis around fentanyl is impacting any frontline service organization. And so it really, you know, in the moments where I really think about it and I you know, reflect on it a lot, it makes me really worried about, you know, to see our healthcare system right now failing or on the verge of failing due to the pandemic. What is to come once we, you know, start to see a downward trend in cases, because there's just so many other healthcare issues, mental health, addictions, that are out there that are just waiting for care. So those are, you know, so how can we at OUTSaskatoon help our community as much as possible in the meantime and for the time to come? Because yeah, the isolation has resulted in so much.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I could go on and on about this forever, but you know, the pandemic has just basically taken the societal divides that previously existed, which were massive in our province and in our country. But I mean, our province has a bit of a different dynamic without getting into all the details. And it's just basically just driven that even further apart, which is basically what happens in any type of crisis. It just drives further inequity, further vulnerability, further marginalization, and it just pushes people that were marginalized even further out to the margins. You know, while those, you know, who have privilege, and frankly, those who make all the decisions basically are largely insulated, you know, from the day-to-day impacts of what it is that we're dealing with. And so so I'll be honest, Marlene, the first thing I'll say is that most people that we serve and that we work with on a day-to-day basis, like all the stuff around pandemic has pretty much just gone right out the window. You know, nobody's really isolating or I think really caring all of that much any longer, because it's just all the day-to-day needs that need to happen. And, you know, there's other factors that are driving it. It's not like it was 18, 19 months ago when there was that overwhelming sense of doom and fear around what COVID was and so forth. So that's, I guess, the first thing to say. And then the second thing to say, I could go on and on about all the addiction stuff. I think we've had 44 or 45 people now in our care base, basically in this clinic, die of presumed fentanyl overdose. I think almost all of those individuals, save for maybe one or two, were my patients. And so again, honestly, like, in order to survive that, like, you have to just figure out a way to absorb and then at the same time move forward and disassociate. Because if you just let and there have been some deaths that have just been so bad that it was just like our whole team almost like just got together and had to have a bit of a cry with one another, because these are people that, you know, were there one day and then boom, just gone, like in an instant. So all to say that, I don't know, there's still very, very complicated dynamics that exist, which is part of why in the last 2-3 days, I've spoken out a little bit more about this whole narrative of the unvaccinated, because I understand that society, and I understand that all of us need to have a place to displace our anger and rage and frustration and tiredness. But it's all a very unhelpful, you know, narrative, which is honestly driven deliberately, I believe, by those in power to just divide us further, and to just further divide us as a society, so that we stop focusing on what really needs to happen, which is, frankly, that, at least in my opinion, that we need good policy and we need leaders who are going to be committed to bringing us together, not continually driving us apart as a political tool. But to be honest with you, like, you know, I'll say like one little thing about COVID, right? And I'll get like, I don't know, like 10,000 likes or something. And then I'll say something about like Overdose Awareness Day, or I'll try to actually give props to the Sask Party for like helping to support, you know, sort of, you know, pseudo safe consumption sites in Saskatoon and Regina. And there's like 13 likes. So it just speaks to, at least in my mind, where we're at society-wise in terms of how we're thinking about all of this. And some of those other issues like mental health and addictions, like issues around, you know, gay, trans, queer persons and two-spirited individuals, it's just still not anywhere even close to the mainstream radar. And we just have to keep working to try to push those issues and pieces to the mainstream, and not just give up, so to speak.
So on that note, I was going to ask a question about hope and all the rest of it, but now we're on to something juicy that and Julia has asked this question, and it's something that's been on my mind as well. And this is about vaccines specifically, and it's about vulnerable groups who have had interactions with the systems and the healthcare system that has created traumas for them. And certainly the queer community would be one of those, and our Indigenous community, and looking at how can we bridge those gaps. In our vaccine policy for the YWCA, we had an exemption line that people could talk about exemptions based on past traumas with the medical system and those institutions. And so I'm wondering if you have and this is Julia's question, if you have suggestions on how we can bridge those gaps for those groups to feel safe in the healthcare system, because for us, we have folks that are not being vaccinated for that very reason, and how to maybe have some of those conversations. It also makes me angry that those aren't the conversations we're having about vaccines, because I think those are some real things that are happening.
You want to start, Amanda?
I would just say that like extensive training around being culturally affirmed and gender affirming care is so crucial, right? If we look at traumas, what is the root of that? People face extensive racism, transphobia, and homophobia when accessing any sort of system, including healthcare. And so we really need to train people to be affirming both culturally in terms of gender, for newcomers, refugees, Indigenous people. There are so many barriers to accessing healthcare, and there are long histories of marginalized communities being researched on. And so there's so much hesitancy within many marginalized communities for such fair reasoning. And so we really need to be practicing culturally affirming service provision so that people feel safe to just enter the door and then hopefully to have a conversation. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree completely with Amanda. I would just add, and I'll probably have the two of you like me for saying this, maybe is that so much of this work, at least that I perceive in this province, has fallen on community-based organizations, service providers who, frankly, have been chronically, deliberately underfunded, and for which there's been no meaningful, again, government sort of programming or anything along those lines to help move, all of this forward. And so what we have, the whole piece around vaccine hesitancy is very complex, but we obviously know that there's a very large proportion of individuals, again, who fall along sort of, lower income persons, persons who are vulnerable, marginalized, suffering from other sort of medical issues like mental health and addictions related challenges and such. And those people represent a disproportionate number of persons who are not vaccinated. And there's so many different reasons for that. And we've seen, again, very good evidence-based approaches, for example, in Ontario, specifically in the Greater Toronto area and in Peel region, where they have done tremendous work engaging, community leaders, service-based organizations, community organizations, and the community as a whole to get out and, and educate and advocate and put everything out there so that, we can engage and create trust and allow for a vaccine to happen. And honestly, we just have not had the capacity to do that here because, and I'm not in any way trying to make excuses for the system, because I think those of us who were trying to plan our vaccine rollout recognized how valuable and important this was. We just didn't have the resources, honestly, to make it happen. And I don't necessarily think that, that we could have done anything differently than what happened right now. I'm just being honest with you all. We needed to do more with our community-based organizations. We still need to do way more. It's just so many of the people that are responsible for dealing with these system issues are stretched between so many different pieces and dealing essentially with crisis in a never-ending way that we just have not had the energy to create these initiatives. So we have a lot of work to do is the bottom line. I think it all comes down to trust and building relationships. Mm-hmm. And that's, I could go on, but I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much. Of course, the big questions as we get rolling, we just get warmed up and now it's 1 o'clock. So there's that. I did want to talk at the end about bringing hope to our community. And I think that because it's nice to start instead of we just started scratching the surface of the major issues. But I think our beginning conversation about compassion and about continuing to lead the community with compassion, having compassion for ourselves is probably what I would sum up is how we bring hope to our community and exhibiting that and leading that through whatever avenues we choose to use to bring our message forward. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Letha, who I promised she'd have a minute, 30 seconds to wrap up, and that or to Skylar or to both, but that hasn't happened. So back to you folks.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of our amazing panelists. You all, just thank you for being vulnerable like we discussed today. Vulnerable is really that key, I think, vulnerability to building that trust, to, helping others view you as coming from a place of compassion. So I really appreciate the conversation and the amazing lessons learned. I just want to say thanks so much. We're over time, and we had a hard stop at 1, so we want you to get back to your day, but please do give all of our panelists a follow, check them out. If you have any further questions, definitely reach out to them. And if you have a second, please do answer our survey, just how the experience today went, so we can continue to improve and create a safe space. So thank you all. Have an amazing rest of your day and stay safe.